Hello everybody, Ben Rogers here, the Raptors Digest. Ryker, trade season has begun. Moves are happening all across the league, and rumors have began to pick up, especially with the draft now in the next couple days. But the biggest name sort of out there on the trade market at this point is James Harden. Former league MVP, obviously has been a superstar for the Houston Rockets, averaged 34 points last season, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, and Ryker, he has requested a trade from the Houston Rockets. He wants to play for a contender elsewhere, and the Brooklyn Nets and Philadelphia 76ers are currently at the top of his list. But, that we've seen these sorts of trade demands before, and one of them ended up giving the Toronto Raptors an NBA championship with Kawhi Leonard ended up coming to the team. Is this something you see Masai Ujiri being able to jump on and maybe making a move for James Harden?
Well, Ben, we need to frame this correctly because there is going to be some absurd takes that come out if we don't substantiate this at the beginning. The thing is, Ben, the top two contending teams right now, per sources, 76ers and Nets. And I'll tell you right now, Ben, I don't see the Raptors wanting James Harden, and specifically because of that man, OG Anunoby. And you might already say 34 points per game, 7 assists, 7 rebounds, and you're not willing to trade a guy that had 10 points per game and played 30 minutes. You're not willing to trade a guy who's not even an all-star for one of the best scorers the league has ever seen. And I'll tell you why, Ben, because the Nets, they have two superstars locked in on contracts. They'll trade everything in the kitchen sink besides Kevin Durant and Kyrie to bring James Harden in. The 76ers, they are stuck on old, long-term, huge contracts. They're willing to trade out because if they don't trade away some of those pieces, they're stuck with that exact same team that hasn't worked for 3 seasons in a row with no ability to make any moves, to improve, to get any worse. Like they're stuck in their exact position. Whereas the Raptors, they're not able to make this trade happen unless they trade their young guys. And without the young guys, without the prospects, this Raptors team could be nothing. They could be in a worse position, Ben. So I don't see this happening. I just want to qualify that from the beginning.
So are you saying you wouldn't want the Raptors to do, you don't think the Raptors should trade an OG Anunoby or Pascal Siakam or one of these guys for a James Harden? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying I'm begging anybody listening to this to come up with a trade that doesn't include OG Anunoby to get James Harden over to the Toronto Raptors.
Well, Ryker, it's a good thing your co-podcaster has been thinking up trades as we've been talking about this podcast, because do you think, because you brought up the two obvious contenders that Shams reported, Brooklyn and Philadelphia, right? They can make some moves along the lines of Caris LeVert, well, in terms of the Nets, Caris LeVert, Jared Allen, Spencer Dinwiddie, a few picks or whatnot, right? The Sixers, they can maybe throw in Ben Simmons, which would be a sweetener. But in terms of contenders, I think the Raptors could sort of put forth the best offer. And I'd pose this question to you. Do you think a move of Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam, Fred in a sign-and trade, and Siakam, who was an All-NBA second team there, and obviously his trade value might be a little bit lower after the bubble, but still had a remarkable season for the Toronto Raptors last season. Would you think that sort of outmatches any potential deals from those two other teams? Or, obviously, OG Anunoby wouldn't be in that specific deal, and we'll talk about his value after, because I've been the biggest OG stan in Raptors Nation since he was a rookie, but James Harden, there's got to be at least a discussion in terms of that. But we'll start with that sort of hypothetical with Fred, a deal surrounding Fred and Siakam. Would you think that outmatches the other teams?
We can start. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because that trade is never going to be presented. You're talking about James Harden wanting to play on a championship contender. I guess he could maybe veto a trade opportunity, but even if he saw this coming his way, what is left of the Toronto Raptors when they trade away Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet? That only championship contending season, that true championship, well, and also winning season, obviously, and having Kawhi. Fred VanVleet was the second best player on that team. Obviously, Kyle Lowry was probably truly the second best player on that team, but Fred VanVleet securing that Finals MVP vote, and Pascal Siakam being able to do what he did at the 4. And now you have question marks. Will you be able to re-sign Serge Ibaka? How are you going to replace Marc Gasol? Kyle Lowry is another year older. So if you trade away, and this is going to maybe throw for a loop some of our comment section because they've been so low on Pascal Siakam. But if you, I'd agree. Maybe you'd want to trade him away. But if you trade him and Fred, what are you left with? How is trading away the next two best guys for a guy who has never been able to make it to the NBA Finals, an improvement from the Raptors' perspective, Ben?
Riker, you're trading a superstar in his prime. A 30-year-old superstar to pair alongside Kyle Lowry, Norman Powell. Matt Thomas will be there off the bench. Serge Ibaka will still likely be on the roster. We can sign different pieces in. And I'm super high on Pascal Siakam. I think he's going to bounce back next season and be that sort of all-NBA player we saw pre-bubble during the course of next season. I'm sure all the reports say he's grinding out this offseason, and I think the bubble was sort of a blimp. He didn't touch a basketball for 3 months, but James Harden's James Harden. James Harden's a guy that's top 4, top 5. You don't think the Raptors would improve with him on the roster and be more attractive for other free agent destinations? Because Giannis is a guy that's been named out there, that are saying we want to target, and we need some bigger names to sort of acquire him. I'm looking at a lineup of Kyle Lowry, James Harden, Norman Powell, OG Anunoby, Serge Ibaka as the starters. Masai Ujiri's phenomenal at filling out those bench units, whether it be through the draft, free agent signings, whatever. We still have a lot of guys on the roster that can sort of fill those places as is right now.
First of all,
I see that team as a championship contender right there. I don't know what you're sort of looking at with
first
that
of all,
roster.
Ben, let's make this very clear. The Raptors are in a worse position to land Giannis Antetokounmpo. If I just pronounced that really weird, I choked on one of the T's, I think, but they're in a worse position to land him next free agency if they acquire James Harden. I think it's documented that those two players don't like each other, and their play styles definitely are not.
That is fair.
They're not cohesive. I think that would be a worse composition of a team. I mean, that's probably a rough statement to make, because you put two great players on a team.
I think their styles a match. It's just that they have like the most random beef in the NBA, where Giannis is just trashing him at All-Star games and stuff. But
I'll put it this way. You trade away Pascal Siakam, that's fine. You figure out what to do from the power forward situation. You go hard to keep Serge Ibaka on. You slide OG to the 4. And then you naturally, as Kyle Lowry shifts out of the point guard, you have Van Vliet, who's no longer terribly undersized, and James Harden. It's pretty weak, I guess, in the backcourt from defensive perspective standpoint. But Fred Van Vliet and James Harden would play well together, because Fred Van Vliet can play off ball and he can shoot.
Well, I guess
three.
we're hypothetically moving Fred here. Do you think a deal with just Siakam could get it done? Siakam and maybe pieces around?
But I'm saying, well, let me go in both directions. Let's say you got rid of Fred Van Vliet. Obviously, having Kyle Lowry and James Harden would be a fantastic backcourt, and that would be complementary again to Pascal Siakam, because he would assume the exact same role that he did when Kawhi Leonard was on the team. So I think you trade away one of those two guys, either way, it's going to be a net positive to the Raptors. Now, to answer your question, no, I don't think one of them gets it done without OG. And I circle back to the what I initially said. I challenge you to make a trade without OG. I don't see it happening. And we're usually on the same page. I'm usually willing to trade OG, but in this situation, I'm not willing to trade OG.
Yeah, well, I'm a big OG guy, especially where I don't think his value's at a place yet where you'd really get the return you'd want on an OG trade. So that's why I'd be hesitant to throw him in there. But I guess to look at the specific value, and in that report, they did say that the Rockets are comfortable having James Harden and Russell Westbrook on their team next season. I think we're going to dive into sort of those realistic sort of cases after. If it's realistic, he's going to get traded. But just looking at other contenders across the league, do you think, because I think even a deal with just Pascal Siakam, maybe Norman Powell, a couple picks, is a better deal than what the Brooklyn Nets can offer, what the 76ers would offer. I guess that's how you value Ben Simmons and those types of things. Maybe, do you see any other team sort of being able to outmatch the Toronto Raptors in terms of a James Harden deal? Maybe the Miami Heat, maybe the Boston Celtics. Who do you see we'd be competing with in a potential trade value?
Yeah, trade value. I mean, it's the same argument for what somebody could offer if Giannis ever hit the trade block. Mm-hmm. And Miami Heat, to me, seem pretty weak, because even if they put Bam Adebayo and Tyler Herro and Duncan Robinson, they could put whoever they want up. To me, I wouldn't pull the trigger on that deal if I was the Houston Rockets. You're getting rid of a guy that is literally the most prolific scorer in NBA history, or one of the best, right? He's not necessarily the best at everything, certainly not defense or winning the playoffs, etc.
He's gotten a lot better at defense.
Yeah, I would also make that same argument, but you want at least an all-star or a perennial player back, right? You want at least a guy that's going to be the helm of your team. I don't know if Bam Adebayo would fit that mold, and I don't know if Jaylen Brown would fit that mold, and or Kemba Walker, Gordon Hayward, who I'd assume the Celtics wouldn't put up Tatum. Maybe the Warriors, again, if they wanted to jump into the mix, obviously picks and Klay Thompson. I don't know if James Harden is the guy that they'd be jumping at the bits to get, but you're right. I mean, you kind of are right. Typically, I think we go a little bit too much overboard in valuing what the Raptors players would be worth to another team in a trade, but I think you're pretty on point to say between us, the 76ers, and the Nets, the Raptors could, if they wanted to, put together a pretty nice package.
Yeah, even with Siakam's poor, obviously, bubble, he's still a guy that made All-NBA second team and is only 25, 26 years old. So he has a lot of value on an open market. He's under contract for a team for a lot of years. Obviously, the Houston Rockets are in a really weird situation right now. And I guess it's smart to dive into those now because the Rockets, obviously, last week, Russell Westbrook requested a trade. Eric Gordon, Daniel House Jr. came out and said that they're unhappy with their roles on the Houston Rockets. They're unhappy with their situation there. Austin Rivers was out there sort of bashing the franchise on a few IG Live videos. PJ Tucker's talking about his frustrations with this contract situation in Houston. And now they have their centerpiece, James Harden, requesting this trade, saying he wants to play elsewhere. Obviously, you lost one of the best GMs in the league in terms of Daryl Morey, who's on the Philadelphia 76ers now, Mike D'Antoni. But so that's sort of all a recipe to blow it up, to sort of take your team and just tear it all down, especially after struggling, being a second-round team in the playoffs for a couple years. But the thing about the Houston Rockets is they might not be inclined to sort of tear their team down, as they traded all their picks to Oklahoma City in that Russell Westbrook trade. So they're in a weird predicament where they're going to want young guys. If they do a sort of rebuild, they're going to want youngish guys that keeps them good, that keeps them afloat, doesn't make them a lottery team or any sort of things like that by any means. And I don't know, I think a Pascal Siakam centered deal is better than what these other teams can offer. And maybe someone can make an argument for Ben Simmons, but in terms of a centerpiece, if you're losing James Harden, if he's just not really willing to be there, I feel like Siakam's the most attractive deal. But would you agree with that there? And do you think the Rockets are, if this gets to a point where James Harden just doesn't want to be there, they'll end up making this type of move?
Okay, how about this? Siakam, Norman Powell, and Matt Thomas.
And a couple firsts, I assume.
Yeah. Would you pull trigger on that?
Like that could get it. I'd do that just because it's James Harden. James Harden literally
and
averaged
that's the thing.
36
but
points
that's
per
kind
game.
of the point. That's kind of the point I'm getting to is this guy, he's not Russell Westbrook where there's a lot of defense, obviously, but there's not the same flaws in his game as there would be with Russell Westbrook. You're looking at kind of making the team around. I don't know. Like you'd be very comfortable to bring James Harden in and kind of let him run the show. I think any team would be comfortable in doing that. And like I said at the very beginning, I made an argument for why the Nets would be willing to, the 76ers would be willing to. I'm sure other teams would want to get into this sweepstakes as well. I'm looking at the Raptors thinking, I just don't see a trade happening without OG, without Fred, without all of our big shots. And I don't know. But the thing is with the Rockets is they do find themselves at least in a position where they should be able to get value back from both Russell Westbrook and James Harden. Mm-hmm. So they should be able to pull in, if they're going young like you suggest, they should be able to pull in a lot of young guys. A lot of dimes for $1 or something like that, if that's the route that they're trying to go.
Yeah. And the thing about it is, because obviously you're not... The big thing in the NBA is trading all your quarters for $1, right? So then you can fill in the other places. That's what the Lakers did. They completely tore out all their entire roster to get LeBron James and Anthony Davis. They filled in the parts and they won a championship. And that's what teams are sort of trying to do. So if the Houston Rockets are moving $1, right? They're not going to want fringe pieces just to
They're going to want 5 or 6 quarters for $1.
Yeah, they want 5 or 6 cores. They want some 50-cent pieces, 75% pieces, right? They want some solid guys coming back their way. And, that's why I sort of write off some of these teams. I think the Raptors can sort of make that move. And if you have to throw an OG Anunoby, I wouldn't throw an OG and Siakam. I think that would be just ludicrous. But, I think would you agree you probably have to do it if you're not adding that much value on top of OG Anunoby? Because James Harden's just an established guy, and we've seen superstars win you championships, and maybe James Harden in a Toronto Raptors system with an ownership willing to spend money, right? It could happen.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to argue that trading away Pascal Siakam and Fred VanVleet would be a negative if you get to bring in James Harden and pair him alongside OG and Kyle and Ibaka, hopefully. I mean, if you lost Ibaka, the whole thing would be shot because you'd have no centers. But I don't know, assuming
OG at center, bro. Rockets 2.0.
Literally just taking the Rockets team and putting a Raptors jersey on them. But that would be the same thing if it was the Nets trade. It would just be the Nets team and you'd put a Rockets jersey on them. But I don't know. I don't know, Ben. I just, my gut says a trade involving Harden to the Raptors just wouldn't make sense for the Raptors, but that's just my gut. I can't really substantiate it with facts.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation, and obviously there hasn't been any reports or anything regarding this move just yet, but Masai Ujiri has made it known he wants to acquire superstars. He's done it in the past. He's acquiring Kawhi Leonard. The Raptors always sort of make their way into these big trade rumors, so I don't know. We'll see what happens with James Harden potentially coming to the Raptors. Hopefully, I don't know. When there's a superstar on the market, you'd love to see him sort of go to your team. I'm just excited to see all the moves happening. Chris Paul going to the Suns today. Schroeder going to the Lakers. What are your thoughts on just all the rumors and the trades before we send it off, Riker?
Yeah, I didn't know if we'd have an opportunity to talk about, but I just want to say kudos to the Thunder because how brilliantly have they played trading and free agency and everything over the past couple seasons, and all of the picks that they've received and all of the young talent that they've got, and they've acquired bad players and Paul George, and they got rid of huge contracts and Russell Westbrook and now Chris Paul, and they still make the playoffs, they still overachieve, and now they're set for the next 10 years probably. So hats off to them.
Yeah, imagine because Sam Presti's one of the top GMs in the NBA, right? Him, Masai Ujiri, Danny Ainge, those guys, they're all up there. But imagine if Sam Presti had an ownership that was willing to spend money, because the Thunder would be filthy.
Yeah, but I mean, still, look at them. Look at all the good players that have gone through their franchise and left or got traded away. You think that they'd be doomed, but instead they keep trucking along and they just keep acquiring picks and solid young talent. So they're doing something right.
Yeah, it's crazy. If the ownership could pay him, then maybe Sam Presti could have a full roster on his team. But they got Kelly Oubre, they got Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. They're going to be fighting for those photo shoot tunnel walkthroughs. They got Danny Green now. It's gonna be an interesting squad to look at. But you guys are the best to make it this far. Check out the Twitter, the Instagram, all that cool stuff. Let us know in the comment section below. What are your thoughts on James Harden potentially coming to the Raptors? Do you think there's a chance it happens? Do you think the Raptors should do it? Let us know. Ryker, any last words?
That's it for me, Ben. Cheers.